If it's midnight right now and you're lying alone in your room, I want you to do one thing. Stay quiet and listen to the ceiling above your head. Because I did that for 3 months straight, and I wish I never had. It was footsteps, steady, slow, like someone pacing back and forth in a small room, exactly at midnight, never a minute off. The problem wasn't that the footsteps existed. The problem was that the room above me, apartment 402, according to the building management's records, hadn't had anyone move in for 6 years. Before I go on, let me pause for a moment. Welcome to After Dark 1692, where we step into stories that, sometimes, even the storyteller isn't sure should be told. If this is your first time here, I'd suggest turning off all the lights, putting your headphones on, and not looking up at your ceiling until this story ends. I moved into that building on an afternoon in October, when the air had just started turning cold, and the leaves on the balcony trees had faded to a dull, dying yellow. It was a 5-story building, built sometime in the 90s, its outer walls streaked with moss, the stairwell narrow and always carrying a faint smell of damp, that particular smell of places that have existed too long, that have witnessed too many people come and go. My unit was on the 3rd floor, apartment 302, a small studio with a window facing the parking lot and a row of streetlights that cast a yellowish glow on the wall every night. I chose that place because the rent was cheap, because it was close to work, and because, honestly, I didn't have many other options left. The building manager, a middle-aged man named Hung, showed me the apartment with a somewhat hurried expression, as if he had something urgent to deal with. He pointed out the amenities, briefly mentioned the trash collection schedule, and handed me the keys without asking anything further. There was a moment, when I asked about the neighbors, that he paused, just for a second, before answering that most of the residents here were older people, living alone, keeping to themselves. I didn't think much of it at the time. Looking back now, I wonder if that pause meant something. My first night there, everything was normal. I unpacked until late, rearranged a few pieces of furniture, then fell asleep to the distant sound of traffic and the creaking of the ceiling fan. I heard nothing worth noting at all. But the second night was different. I woke up close to midnight, not entirely sure why. Maybe thirst. Maybe that wordless unease people sometimes feel before their conscious mind can even name it. I lay still in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, and that was when I heard it for the first time. Footsteps. Not the hurried steps of someone crossing a room to grab a glass of water, and not the running steps of a child. It was a slow, steady, deliberate rhythm, like someone pacing from one end of a room to the other, then turning back, over and over. Every 7 or 8 steps, there'd be a brief pause, as if the person stopped, thought about something, then kept walking. I lay there, my heart beating a little faster, but I told myself it was just the upstairs neighbor, unable to sleep, or soothing a small child. People always tend to reach for the most reasonable explanation, just so they can close their eyes in peace. I did too. I pulled the blanket up, turned to face the wall, and tried to fall back asleep. The next morning, I had almost forgotten about it, until I ran into Auntie Lone, the woman living in Unit 301, right next to mine, while she was watering a few pots of plants outside her door. We exchanged casual greetings, and in the middle of small talk, I mentioned the footsteps from the night before, just as an offhand comment to keep the conversation going. But her reaction made me stop cold. She stopped watering. She looked at me for a long moment, then asked, her voice dropping low, "You heard it? From the 4th floor?" I nodded, a little thrown by her reaction. Auntie Lone sighed, set down her watering can, and spoke to me in the tone of someone who had told this story too many times before, to the point where it no longer frightened her, only exhausted her. She told me that apartment 402, directly above mine, had had a tenant for a very long time. But in all 6 years she'd lived there, she had never once seen that person. No one had. No mail was ever delivered. No trash was ever taken out. There wasn't a single sign of anyone living there. Except, exactly as I had just experienced, the footsteps at midnight. But the rent still gets paid every month, right on time, Auntie Lone said. Bank transfer, never a single day late. I asked if the building management knew who this person was. Auntie Lone shrugged. She said that according to the lease, the unit was rented under a name, Din, but no one in the building had ever met or spoken with this person, not even Mr. Hung, the manager. Every transaction went through bank transfers and text messages. At that point, I was still trying to hold on to a rational point of view. Maybe it was just someone who lived a reclusive life, didn't like socializing, worked remotely, and only went out at hours no one paid attention to, very late, very early, or through some other route I didn't know about. The world isn't short on people like that. Solitude, sometimes, isn't some mystery, it's simply a choice. But Auntie Lone's next sentence was what truly sent a chill down my spine. There's a camera in the 4th floor hallway, she said. Mr. Hung once had the security guard pull the footage because someone complained, just like you're doing now. An entire month of recordings, and not a single frame showed the door of 402 opening. I asked, perhaps with a hint of skepticism, "You mean the camera was broken?" "The camera works fine," she replied. "It records the other units just fine. People coming and going, deliveries, food orders. It's only the door of 402 that's never once been seen open." Auntie Lone's story should have made me pack up and find somewhere else to live immediately. Instead, it stirred in me a curiosity I still can't fully explain to this day, as if some part of me needed to know, had to know, what was really happening above my head every single night. In the days that followed, I began paying closer attention. I started listening every night, noting the exact times the footsteps began and ended. Almost without exception, exactly at midnight, the footsteps would start, continuing for 20 to 30 minutes, then stopping completely. No sound of a door opening, no running water, no television, no sign of any normal domestic activity at all. Just the footsteps, over and over, in the dark. I started asking other neighbors too. Most avoided the subject entirely, as though there were an unspoken rule in the building. No one talks about apartment 402. Only one person, an elderly man living on the 5th floor whom I happened to meet in the elevator, was willing to share one small detail that kept me awake for many nights afterward. He told me that once, a few years back, he'd happened to walk through the 4th floor hallway around midnight, not out of curiosity, but because the elevator was broken and he had to walk down from the 5th floor. As he passed the door of 402, he heard the footsteps stop abruptly, as if whoever was inside knew someone was standing outside the door. And in that moment of absolute silence, he felt, not heard, but felt, something pressing itself against the door from the other side, separated from him by nothing more than a thin sheet of wood. "I didn't dare stand there another second," the old man said, his voice still trembling slightly as he recounted it. "I ran straight down the stairs, not daring to look back. I asked him whether he thought someone truly lived in that room, or if it was just his imagination, some strange acoustic quirk of an old building. He only shook his head, not answering directly, but said something I've never been able to forget. Some rooms don't need anyone living in them to still be occupied." That sentence haunted me for days afterward. I began noticing small details I'd never paid attention to before. The way the hallway light on the 4th floor always flickered slightly right in front of 402's door, while every other bulb stayed steady. The way the temperature in that area always seemed a little lower than the rest of the building, though I had no real way to measure it and confirm the feeling wasn't just in my head. And something stranger still. Every time I stood in front of that door, something I started doing, at first only out of curiosity, but which slowly became a habit I couldn't resist. I always felt as if the air around me thickened, as though the room behind that door was holding a breath it had never once let out. I started digging into the building's history. There was nothing unusual in any public records I could access. No criminal cases, no accidents reported in the news tied to that address. But I also understood that not every story leaves a paper trail. Some things only survive in the memories of those who lived through them, passed from one person to another, losing a little truth and gaining a little imagination with each retelling, until no one can tell anymore where the line between the two used to be. One night, about 2 weeks after I'd moved in, I decided to do something that, looking back, I still don't understand how I found the nerve, or the recklessness, to do. I brought my phone, switched it to video mode, and quietly climbed the stairwell toward the 4th floor hallway, right at midnight, just as the footsteps began. The 4th floor hallway was darker than I remembered. The yellow light cast long shadows across the old tiled floor, stretching toward the doors of each unit. The silence was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. I walked one step at a time, slowly, trying not to make a sound, until I was standing directly in front of the door to 402. The footsteps continued inside, steady, unhurried, as if completely unaware that someone was standing just outside. I raised my phone, aiming the camera toward the gap beneath the door, trying to capture anything at all, a flicker of light, a moving shadow, any piece of evidence that could prove a real person actually existed inside. And then, at the exact moment I lifted my phone, the footsteps stopped. Abruptly. No warning. Like a tape cut clean in half. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound I had ever heard in my life. I stood there, frozen, acutely aware that something on the other side of that door was also standing frozen, and was listening to me in exactly the same way I had just been listening to it. I don't know how long I stood there. It might have been only a few seconds. It might have been much longer. But what truly sent me into a panic, what made me turn and bolt down the stairs without daring to look back, exactly the way the old man on the 5th floor once had, was one final sound I heard just before I fled that hallway. A sigh, very faint, very close, as if it had come from right at the gap beneath the door, only inches from my face. I ran back to my room, locked the door tight, and sat curled up on my bed for the rest of the night, not daring to close my eyes. The next morning, when I reviewed the video I had recorded, I discovered something that made the entire situation even stranger than anything I could have imagined. In the video, there was no sigh recorded at all, only the footsteps, clear and steady, continuing without interruption all the way to the very last second of the recording, never once stopping the way I had heard with my own ears in that moment. What did that mean? That the footsteps in the video kept going, while in reality, at that exact moment, I was certain I'd heard them stop, certain I'd heard that sigh. The two things couldn't both be true, unless something, in that exact instant, had made me hear something my phone never picked up at all. I began to wonder whether the problem wasn't with apartment 402 at all, but with me. Was I slowly losing the ability to tell what was real from what I imagined? But if that were true, why did Auntie Lone, why did the old man on the 5th floor, why did the entire building share the same story, the same vague, unspoken fear that no one dared say out loud? In the days that followed, I noticed something even stranger. The footsteps seemed to shift according to my own mood. On nights when I felt calm, the footsteps stayed steady and gentle, just as always. But on nights when I felt anxious, uneasy, or, like the night after I filmed the video, genuinely terrified, the footsteps grew faster, more frantic, sometimes as if something were pacing the room in a state of agitation, mirroring the exact rhythm of my own racing heartbeat. I didn't dare tell anyone about this except Auntie Lone, because I knew exactly how absurd it sounded. But when she heard me describe it, she grew unusually serious. She took my hand, looked me straight in the eye, and said something I will never forget. "Don't ever stand in front of that door again. Not because something in there will hurt you, but because the most frightening thing is that it's learning from you." In the days following that conversation with Auntie Lone, I tried to live as though nothing had happened. I told myself I just needed to focus on work, avoid thinking about the room upstairs, and everything would gradually return to normal. But some fears, once they've taken root in the mind, don't leave just because we want them to. They lie quiet, waiting for a moment of weakness to rise again. That moment came on an evening when I got home from work later than usual. It was already dark, and only one light remained working in the third-floor hallway. The others had burned out long ago, and no one had bothered replacing them. As I put my key in the lock, I paused, sensing something strange. My door didn't seem shut as tightly as usual. I pushed gently, and it opened more easily than I remembered, as if the lock had never been properly engaged. I stood at the threshold for a long moment, trying to recall whether I had locked up carefully that morning. I've always been meticulous about that, a habit built over years of living alone, so the suspicion grew heavier by the second. I stepped inside, turned on the light, and scanned the small room. Everything looked the same as always. The chair was in its usual spot. The laptop still sat on the desk, no sign of a break-in. But when I approached my desk, I noticed something that turned my whole body cold. The notebook I used for work notes, the one I always kept face down whenever I left the room, a small, almost unconscious habit, was now lying face up, open to the exact page where I'd been recording the times the footsteps started and stopped each night. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to find some reasonable explanation. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe I'd absent-mindedly left it that way before rushing out that morning. When faced with something inexplicable, people always tend to cling to the possibility that they themselves made a mistake, because that, at least, is easier to accept than the alternative. But there was one detail I couldn't explain away as my own mistake. Beneath my notes on that page, there was a new line, handwriting I didn't recognize, shaky and uneven, as if written by a hand unaccustomed to holding a pen, or one that hadn't written anything in a very long time. The line held only 3 words, "I can hear." I don't remember how long I stood frozen after reading those words. I only remember that afterward, I checked every corner of my small room, under the bed, inside the closet, the bathroom, even though I knew perfectly well the room was too small for anyone to hide without me noticing immediately. There was no one there. The window was still locked from the inside. The front door, though slightly ajar when I'd returned, showed no signs of forced entry. That night, I didn't dare turn off the lights. I sat propped against the headboard, hugging a pillow, eyes fixed on the ceiling, waiting for the familiar footsteps. And right at midnight, they came. But this time, something was different. The footsteps no longer moved from one end of the room to the other as usual. They stopped, directly above where I was sitting, and remained still. No movement, no other sound, just the silent presence of something directly above my head, as though it too were sitting, waiting, exactly as I was. I don't know how long I sat like that through the night. I only know that when I woke the next morning, I was still in the same position, my body stiff from sitting motionless too long, and the notebook was still open to the page with those words, a reminder that it hadn't been a dream. I decided to go find Mr. Hung, the building manager, and ask him directly about apartment 402. I told him about the footsteps, about the notebook, even though I knew beforehand how unbelievable my story would sound. As Mr. Hung listened, his expression shifted into something I'd never seen on him before. Not skepticism, but a kind of exhaustion mixed with worry, as if he'd been dreading the day he'd have to hear this story again from another tenant. He told me, in a low, halting voice, that Unit 402 once had a real tenant, quite a long time ago, before even Auntie Lone had moved in. It was a man who lived alone, kept little contact with his neighbors, and worked in some kind of design field Mr. Hung couldn't quite recall. The man had one strange habit. He often stayed up very late, pacing his room for hours on end, as if it were a way to think, or perhaps to calm himself from something no one else knew about. Then, one day, the man stopped paying rent. Mr. Hung had gone up and knocked several times, but no one ever answered. Finally, when he decided to use the spare key to check inside, the room was completely empty. No furniture, no trace that anyone had ever lived there, as if the man had never existed at all. No one knew where he'd gone. No missing person report was ever filed, because officially, no one had ever registered his existence in the first place. But the rent kept getting paid, Mr. Hung said, his voice trembling. Every month, right on time, even though that room has sat empty for years. I checked the account, tried to trace where the money came from, but there was never any lead. It's as if the room itself, not a person, was paying to keep existing. I asked him why he never reported it to the police, why he never tried to get to the bottom of it once and for all. Mr. Hung looked at me with the eyes of a man who had given up hope of finding an answer long ago. He said he had tried, years before, but every investigation hit a dead end. No evidence of a crime, no confirmed victim, nothing for the police to officially act on. Eventually, the case was filed as insufficient grounds, and over time, no one wanted to bring it up again. "It's best," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "if you move out as soon as possible." But I didn't take that advice. Looking back now, I know that was a decision I shouldn't have made. But at the time, some part of me, the part that always craved an answer, that could never stand ambiguity, had won out over the survival instinct, telling me to leave that place immediately. I started paying closer attention to myself, to small changes I hadn't noticed at first. I realized I'd developed a habit of pacing back and forth in my room during moments of stress, a habit I'd never had before. I noticed I was staying up later, closer to midnight, as though my body was gradually syncing itself to a rhythm that wasn't my own. One night, I woke up mid-sleep and found myself standing in the middle of the room, with no memory of having left the bed, my bare feet ice cold from standing on the tile floor too long. I checked the time, midnight, and directly above my head, the footsteps were sounding out, perfectly synchronized with my own ragged, panicked breathing at that moment, like two clock hands pointing to the exact same instant. I began to fear my own sleep. I feared those stretches of time I couldn't control my own body during, unable to be certain whether I was awake or dreaming, whether I was still myself or slowly becoming something else, a version of me being gradually reshaped into the likeness of whatever existed above that room. It was during that period that I decided to install a small camera in my own room, aimed at the bed, to record what happened at night, not to investigate apartment 402 anymore, but to investigate myself, to know for certain whether what I was experiencing was real, or simply the product of a mind slowly breaking down from prolonged sleep deprivation and fear. I told Auntie Lone everything I'd learned, one afternoon when she invited me over for tea. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing heavier with every word. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, looking out the window, before finally speaking, her voice slow and measured, as if weighing every word carefully. She told me something she'd never mentioned before, something she said she'd spent years trying to forget. She said that the previous tenant of Unit 301, a young woman, had gone through something similar to what I was describing. That woman had also started hearing the footsteps, had also begun noticing the same eerie synchronization between her emotions and the sounds above, and eventually, after a few months, had moved out abruptly, without a word of goodbye, leaving almost all her belongings behind. "But what I still remember," Auntie Lone said, her voice trembling slightly, "is the night before she left. I heard her talking inside her room. Very late, even though I knew for certain she lived alone. Her voice was flat, even, like she was answering someone. And the next morning, when I asked if she'd had a guest over the night before, she looked at me with panic in her eyes and said she hadn't spoken to anyone. She didn't even remember waking up at that hour." Auntie Lone's story made me realize I wasn't the first, and probably wouldn't be the last, to fall into this cycle. Something existing in that room 402 had been waiting, one person after another, each one slowly drawn into a process of assimilation they never even noticed happening, until the line between themselves and whatever was waiting had blurred too much to tell apart. I asked Auntie Lone why she'd stayed in this building for so many years, knowing what strange things were happening. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw a mixture of resignation and a fear that had become so familiar it no longer sent her into panic. "Because my unit is on the 3rd floor, same as yours, but farther from 402, she said. "The footsteps, to me, are just a distant sound, not close enough for it to find me the way it found you, or the way it found the girl before you. Maybe it needs a certain closeness, a certain depth of loneliness, before it can begin." Auntie Lone's words made me realize something terrifying. My unit, 302, sat directly beneath 402, the closest position possible in the entire building. It wasn't a coincidence that I'd become its next target. Perhaps physical proximity acted like some kind of conductor, and I, without meaning to, had placed myself in exactly the right position to become the next in a long line of quiet victims claimed by that room. That night, I returned to my room with a new resolve. I understood that if I kept waiting, kept letting things unfold passively, I would soon become the next version of the woman Auntie Lone had described, or worse, the next version of the man who had vanished without a trace years before. I had to confront the source of all of this directly, even if it meant climbing to the 4th floor and standing in front of the door of 402 once more, not to observe from a distance, but to truly face it. I spent the following evening preparing. I bought a strong flashlight, wrote down Auntie Lone's and Mr. Hung's phone numbers in case of an emergency, and tried to steel myself for whatever might happen. I knew, rationally, that this could be an extremely dangerous decision, but I also knew that if I didn't act, the thing slowly consuming me night after night would only keep growing, until there was nothing left of me worth saving. At exactly 11:50 at night, 10 minutes before the familiar footsteps usually began, I left my room, stepped out into the 3rd floor hallway, and started climbing the stairwell toward the 4th floor. With every step I took, my heart beat a little faster, and one question kept repeating in my mind. This time, when I faced that door, would whatever was waiting inside still be patiently watching me from a distance, or was it already ready for something far greater? I didn't know the answer, but I knew that whatever happened, I couldn't turn back now. The 4th floor hallway was darker than I remembered, perhaps because this time I hadn't come out of curiosity, but with a cold determination that sharpened every one of my senses. I could hear my own footsteps clearly against the tile floor, hear the old fluorescent light buzzing weakly, hear even the pounding of my own heart in my chest. I stopped in front of the door to 402 at the exact moment my phone's clock ticked over to midnight. And just as always, the footsteps began sounding from inside. But this time, standing right up against the door, I noticed something I'd never been able to sense before, standing in my own room below. The sound wasn't coming from any distance at all. It sounded as if it were right beside my ear, as though no wall, no door, separated me from whatever was producing it. I reached out and touched the lock. Just as Auntie Lone had said, the metal was rusted, coated in a thick layer of dust, as if no one had touched it in years. But when I gently turned the handle, to my horror, the door shifted slightly open, not locked at all, despite every outward appearance suggesting it had been sealed shut forever. I stood there, hand still on the handle, and for one moment, every rational part of me screamed that I should let go, turn around, run down the stairs, leave the building that very night, and never come back. But some other part of me, the part that had already been pulled too deep into this to turn back, pushed the door open anyway. Inside, the darkness was so thick that the beam of my flashlight seemed to be swallowed whole the instant it entered. I took one step, then another, the trembling light sweeping across the room. It was almost entirely empty. No bed, no dresser, nothing at all except a single old wooden chair placed in the middle of the room, facing away from the door, toward a window where pale moonlight filtered through a layer of dust on the glass. The footsteps had stopped the moment I pushed the door open. The silence inside that room was so heavy, I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. And then, I saw it. There was a figure standing in the farthest corner of the room, where my flashlight's beam barely reached the edge of the darkness surrounding it. The figure stood with its back to me, completely still, wearing clothes that, in the dim light, I couldn't make out the color of, but the shape, the way the hem hung, the way the pant legs were rolled up slightly at the ankle, looked disturbingly familiar. It was the exact outfit I was wearing at that moment. I stood frozen, not daring to breathe, my flashlight hand trembling so badly the beam of light danced across the wall and across that figure. I wanted to speak, wanted to ask who, or what, it was, but my throat had gone dry, unable to produce a single sound. That was exactly when the figure began to move. Very slowly, it tilted its head to one side, not turning fully, just enough for me to see the outline of one cheek, part of an ear, and I realized, with an icy horror spreading through my body, that the shape, the angle, was identical to the one I saw every morning looking back at me from my own mirror. "You came," a voice spoke, not the voice of a stranger, but my own voice, coming from the shadow standing in the corner of the room. Not shrill, not distorted, the way people usually imagine the voices of ghosts in horror stories. It was calm, familiar, warm, in exactly the way I spoke to myself in my own head during sleepless nights. I stepped back, my back hitting the doorframe. "What are you?" I asked, my voice shaking so badly it barely formed words. The shadow gave a soft laugh, small, low, carrying no malice at all, only a deep sadness that made me involuntarily still. "I'm not something foreign to you," it said. "I'm every night you've lain alone with no one calling to check on you. I'm every time you wanted to talk to someone but couldn't find anyone to call. I'm the silence you've carried into this room, every night, for months, even before you moved in here." I didn't fully understand everything it had just said, but there was something in those words that made my heart clench, a truth I had never dared admit even to myself. The loneliness I carried hadn't started when I moved into this building. It had been there for a long time, quietly growing over the years I'd lived far from my family, far from any close relationships, absorbed entirely in work and endless deadlines, until I realized I'd become someone with almost no one left to share anything with. The man who lived here before you, the shadow continued, was just as lonely as you are now. He came here, carrying his silence with him, and night after night, that silence slowly took on a shape of its own, slowly learned how to walk, how to breathe, how to exist independently of him, until one day he realized he no longer needed to exist at all, because there was already another version of him, one no longer suffering, no longer lonely, ready to keep going in his place. I felt my whole body go cold hearing this. Where did he go? I asked, though deep down, I already sensed the answer. The shadow didn't answer the question directly. Instead, it slowly turned to face me fully for the first time, and in the trembling flashlight beam, I saw that face, my own face, but with hollow eyes that reflected no light at all, like two bottomless black pits. He didn't go anywhere, it said, its voice still unsettlingly gentle. He simply stopped being necessary, just like, someday, not too far from now, you'll stop being necessary too. I stepped back again, one hand reaching behind me for the doorframe, ready to flee. But right at that moment, the shadow took a single step toward me, just one, and in that instant, every light in the hallway behind me went out at once, plunging the entire space into absolute darkness. I don't remember exactly how I made it down 3 flights of stairs in that darkness. I only remember bursting into my room, slamming the door shut, locking every latch I could reach, then collapsing into a corner, shaking so hard I couldn't control my own breathing. But what haunted me most wasn't the image of that shadow wearing my face, nor the story of the man who had stopped being necessary. What haunted me most was the last thing it said, echoing behind me as I fled that room in the dark. Words that, even now, whenever night falls, I can still hear faintly in my ear. See you again, on the night you no longer want to wake up. I don't know how long I sat curled up in that corner of my room, only that when I finally lifted my head, morning light had crept through the gap in the curtains, and birdsong drifted in cheerfully from the balcony outside, a sound so ordinary it felt almost foreign, after everything I'd just been through. I didn't go to work that day. I sat on my bed the entire morning, trying to piece together what had happened, trying to find some way to understand it without letting myself completely fall apart. The shadow's final words kept echoing in my mind, not so much as a direct threat, but as a cold truth waiting for me somewhere ahead, if I let my loneliness keep growing unchecked. By noon, I knocked on Auntie Lone's door. When she opened it and saw my face, she didn't need to ask what had happened. She pulled me inside, made me a cup of hot tea, and sat listening as I told her everything I had witnessed in room 402, detail by detail, holding nothing back, including the deepest fear I had never dared to say aloud to anyone, that on certain nights, even before I'd moved into that building, I had lain awake wondering whether anyone would even notice if I disappeared one day. Auntie Lone listened without interrupting, a deep sadness in her eyes, as though she'd heard this story too many times before, in too many different shapes, from too many different people who had passed through that building. When I finished, she took my hand and held it tight, and said something that I believe saved me from becoming the next name on the list of those who had stopped being necessary.
"That thing up there,"
she said, "isn't powerful because of any strength it has on its own. It's powerful because it feeds on the loneliness you keep nurturing inside yourself, night after night, alone, with no one knowing. If you let it continue like that, it will keep growing, until it's strong enough to completely replace whatever part of you is still living. But if you let others in, if you let real connections fill that emptiness, it will have nowhere left to exist." I wasn't sure whether she was describing some supernatural phenomenon, or whether she was trying, through the wisdom of a woman who had watched too many young people slowly sink into isolation, to show me a much simpler truth. But at that moment, I no longer had the strength to tell the difference between the two. I only knew that her words were the one thing that made me feel there was still a path forward, instead of only darkness waiting ahead. In the weeks that followed, I began to change. I called my family more often, calls I used to always postpone under the excuse of being busy. I reached out again to a few old friends I'd drifted from over the years, caught up in the endless churn of work. I started having dinner with Auntie Lone a few times a week, listening to her stories about the years she'd lived in that building, about the people who had come and gone, and about the ones who never came back. And strangely enough, as I began filling my life with those real connections, the footsteps from apartment 402 gradually grew fainter, not gone entirely. Every now and then, on nights when I let the old loneliness creep back in, I'd still hear it, softer now, more distant, like a quiet reminder that it was still there, still waiting, patient, the way it had waited for the man before me, and, perhaps, the way it would go on waiting for others after me. 3 months later, I moved out of that building, not fleeing in panic, but because I'd found a new job in another city, closer to my family. Before I left, I stopped by to say goodbye to Auntie Lone one last time. She hugged me tightly and told me she was glad I'd found my way out, when so many others hadn't. Before stepping out the door, I asked her what would become of apartment 402 once I was no longer living below it. Auntie Lone only smiled sadly and said that someone else would move in eventually, someone lonely in their own way, and the story, most likely, would begin all over again. I left that building on a summer morning, golden sunlight spilling over the street, and I promised myself that I would never again let the silence of lonely nights find room to grow inside me. Looking back on everything I went through, I realized this story, terrifying as it was, is really about something deeply human. Loneliness, if left unattended for too long, will find a way to fill itself in, sometimes in ways we never expect, and sometimes, the way it fills itself in is exactly what pulls us further away from who we really are. To me, the tenant on the 4th floor wasn't just some mysterious presence in an old room. It was the exaggerated image of what can happen when we let silence take over our lives, night after night, unnoticed, unquestioned. The lesson I took from this isn't to fear strange rooms, it's to pay attention to the emptiness within ourselves and not hesitate to reach out to someone. A phone call, a shared meal, a simple check-in, before that emptiness has the chance to take on a shape of its own. If you, like I once did, are going through long nights alone with no one beside you, I hope you'll remember that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's hiding in the dark, it's letting that darkness become your only companion. Now, I want to hear your stories. Have you ever heard a sound in the night you couldn't explain? Leave a comment below and tell me and everyone else about it. And if this story was haunting enough to make you double-check your door lock tonight, hit subscribe to After Dark 1692, so I'll have the motivation to keep bringing you stories like this. Stories that, once heard, will never quite let you sleep the same way again.